What binds the Megamycete to Re7's mold? A shared hunger. The Spencer Mansion labs were no containment vault, they were a forge. Steel and spores, Umbrella's architects bred pathogens here, not sealed them away. Why bury Raccoon's fate in forest soil? Because the city above was always the test site. Why Progenitor Barry would Spencer consume its mansion? Raccoon's labs were fate in no makers, forest soil containment vault, they were a forge. Or did they hope the mold would obey? The blueprints whisper, weaponization, not warning. A cold truth cracks the voice, thighs was never an accident. The Spencer Mansion wasn't a containment zone, it was a pressure valve. Umbrella's Arklay experiments weaponized Progenitor, not contained it. When the T-virus ruptured in '98, it wasn't a leak, it was a release. Corporate boards signed off on human trials, burial orders, and Raccoon City's biohazard designation years prior. The outbreak was no accident. It was phase 2, a dead city becomes a pressure test. They knew the walls would crack, they knew the mold would spread. The blueprints don't whisper anymore, they scream. Raccoon's fall wasn't a failure, it was a forecast. The stairway of the sun bloomed in silence. Its petals held the progenitor's first breath of virus spun from pollen, from fever, from Umbrella's hunger. They transplanted the flower to Arklay, buried it in stone. The Spencer Mansion did not guard a contagion, it fed one. Raccoon City rose as a monument, its streets paved with bioweapon blueprints. Children played where test subjects once bled. How many failures did they bury before 1998? The labs did not whisper, they wept. The progenitor was never a cure, never a shield. It was a script, every infection, every collapse, every scream into the mold's hollow quietin in Africa's soil. Umbrella's hands did not tremble when the walls cracked, they had already burned the escape routes. Raccoon's fall was not a mistake. It was a proving ground, a rehearsal. The blueprints still scream, but the world has yet to learn the lesson. 160. The lab's air still reeks of antiseptic and decay. Flickering fluorescents cast shadows over rusted containment units. A single file drawer, half ajar, spills yellowed reports. 1968. Marcus handwriting precise, clinical details progenitor's first genetic leap, not a weapon, a asterisk foundation asterisk. The virus thrived in extremophiles, replicated in dead tissue, but mutated when forced into live hosts. The notes grow frantic, instability at 2%. Subject 12A, liquefaction observed. The walls themselves seem to pulse, as if the progenitor's ghost still clings to the concrete, a deeper corridor. A security terminal, its screen cracked but active. Logs show Marcus injecting the T-virus strain into a live sample 1993. The progenitor's skeleton, repurposed, more aggressive. More obedient, the T-virus wasn't a failure, it was a pivot, a means to bypass the original's randomness, but the mutation paid a price. The files whisper it, asterisk horizontal transmission asterisk. The virus could spread, not just in cells but through society. The Spencer Mansion wasn't a lab. It was a pressure valve, a test of containment. How many infected bodies clogged its halls? How many were left to rot, their screams buried under Umbrella's cleanup? The truth carves itself into the walls. The progenitor's instability wasn't a flaw, it was a warning, a lesson Umbrella chose to ignore. Raccoon City's fate was etched in these blueprints. A full-scale trial, the T-virus, engineered to spread through aerosol, became the city's silent executioner. But what of the survivors? What of the ones who carried the progenitor's remnants into the wild? The files end abruptly, no closure. Only a final log, asterisk Project Marcus Phase 2 initiated, asterisk the lights stutter. A distant hum rises like a breath held too long. The virus never stopped evolving, and neither did its masters. Beneath Raccoon City's neon glow, a lab hummed in 1998, not to cure, to create. July's heat warped the Spencer Mansion into a pressure cooker. T-virus seeped through cracks in the foundation, Umbrella's first breath in their own death rattle. Bravo team's logs whisper of a containment breach, a lie. The mansion wasn't a vault, it was a proving ground. Dozens of bodies, contorted, silent, no accident, no mistake, a clinical failure. The progenitor's shadow looms here. Its DNA, spliced and seared into the T-virus, made this collapse inevitable. Umbrella's files burn. Paper trails of infected cadavers, disposal orders signed in red. Raccoon's fate was written when the first vial shattered. What if the mansion's collapse wasn't a warning, but a rehearsal? Security feeds flicker Bravo's final moments. Their screams muffled by the very walls designed to hold horrors. A cruel joke, the virus escaped, yes, but Umbrella Asterisk wanted Asterisk it too. A failed test demands iteration. The progenitor was the original sin, T-Virus its cursed child. Raccoon's ashes are not an end, they are a blueprint. The lab's hum grows louder, deeper, a heartbeat they knew. Every name etched on a memorial stone, a pawn in a game older than their grief. The virus never stopped evolving, neither did its masters. But here in the dark the truth trembles. This was not a mistake, it was a beginning. The missile's fireball still smolders in the memory of those who survived the algorithm. Smoke curled black and sweet over Arklay's pines, a perfume of burnt flesh and ozone. Beneath Raccoon City's rubble, the labs pulsed silent, no alarms, no sirens. Only the hum of cold storage units, cradling vials of progenitor strains harvested from test subjects who never knew they were pioneers. The Spencer mansion, with its gargoyle-choked walls and blood-stained ballroom, was never a vault, it was a proving ground. A stage where Umbrella's scientists danced with monsters to see which would bow. By 1998, the virus had already leapt oceans. Harvard's genetics wing, Kyoto's pharmaceutical silos, Prague's civilian quarantine clinics all fed data to the same shadow board. The progenitor's mutations were not accidents. They were iterations, a chess game played with human pawns, their suffering tracked in redacted reports buried beneath 6 continents. When the missiles fell, it was not to stop a lake, it was to erase a prototype. Raccoon City was the first successful burn of a new playbook, destroy the evidence, not the infection. The films show survivors clawing at ash-coated windows. The comics reveal file fragments codenames *T Alex * and * Nemesis * in the virus reach, extended to Moscow's snows and Buenos Aires slums. Re3's helix-shaped lab, with its walls etched with the same fungal patterns as Raccoon's sewers, proves the progenitor's roots spread deeper than any containment protocol. What grows in one rotting city thrives in others. The G-virus, the T-virus, the Lisa T. Viruses all are cousins in a family tree Umbrella planted decades prior. Did they think the Earth would forget? The missile strike carved a scar, but scars do not silence truths. In the quiet between explosions, the progenitor whispered. It whispered in the blood of every test subject, every infected soldier, every child born with a virus in their veins. Raccoon's fall was not an end, it was a rehearsal, and the world, in its complacency, did not notice the curtain rising elsewhere. They called it a containment zone, a lie. The Spencer Mansion's labs were not vaults of caution, they were crucibles of creation. Sterile walls, flickering fluorescence, the stench of blood and ozone. Shattered glass tubes littered the floor, progenitor vials ruptured in failed trials. Umbrella did not contain the virus, they weaponized it. The T-virus was not a mistake, it was a byproduct of their hunger. Researchers, it was a byproduct of their hunger, screamed as flesh rejected flesh, their veins blackening with the very cure they'd engineered. The 1998 protocol was no accident. When the world blinked at Raccoon's collapse, Umbrella struck. Helicopters dropped serums, not supplies. Soldiers wore respirators not to save lives, but to avoid becoming test subjects. The city's rot was deliberately a pressure valve for a system designed to burst. Every locked door, every motion sensor, every trap in those halls, they were not to keep monsters out. They were to keep monsters in asterisk. And yet the virus escaped, not because Umbrella failed, because they allowed it. The progenitor, unstable and screaming, mutated beyond even their designs. But the lesson was written in ash. Raccoon City was a prototype, a dress rehearsal for cities yet unnamed. How many more labs lie buried, their experiments still writhing? How many more containment zones are birth canals for hell? The rage is not in what they did, it is in what they knew they did, and the world still walks blind. The Spencer Mansion was no sanctuary, its stone halls were a crucible. The progenitor virus, Umbrella's first sin, was never meant to be contained. They engineered chaos. Genetic instability was not an accident, it was the progenitor's price. When the T-virus split from its core, it was not a failure. It was a forecast. Raccoon City's breath became a bioweapon's sigh. The canals, those veins of hell, carried not waste but intent. Every mutation, every corpse was a step toward perfection, or so they believed. What does a god do when its creation defies design? It abandons the blueprint. Umbrella did not flee the mansion, they discarded a prototype. The T-virus was their inheritance, a parasite born of pride. The truth is simpler than horror. The fall of Raccoon City was no mistake, it was a trial run. A city of flesh sacrificed to prove a weapon could rise from rot, and beneath it all the progenitor slept, not dead, not dormant, waiting for the hands that made it to return, broken, to claim their masterpiece. The Spencer mansion was no sanctuary. Its stone walls held no prayers, only vats of blackened fluid, bubbling with stolen life. Umbrella's architects designed Arklay not to contain but to calibrate. Every locked door, every gas vent, every shattered portrait of Oswell E. was a variable in a grand equation. How far can rot spread before the host dies? The progenitor, that first sick alchemy of DNA and death, was never a prototype. It was the keystone. A godhead for a company that worshipped plagues as prophet. They knew the virus would mutate, knew it would hunger, but they miscalculated the speed. The rage, when the Nemesis project gnawed through its leash in 1998, it was not a breach. It was a prediction coming due. The T-virus, the G-strain, the horrors of Kijujual were children of this original sin. Each failed experiment a rung on the ladder of their hubris. The lab beneath Raccoon City did not leak. It vomited 1,000 failed hosts, their bones hollowed into vectors. The antiseptic air reeked of iron and rot, and still the progenitor crawls. Its spores slumber in concrete cracks. Its spores ride the wind. What became of the vials buried when the mansion collapsed? What of the engineers who fled, their coats heavy with vile? The virus does not need a city to burn. It needs bodies. It needs you. Umbrella fell, but their masterpiece outlived them. The world moved on, built over the scars. Yet in every hospital, every vaccine vial, every child born with a fever there it waits, not dormant. Not dead, awaiting the next hand bold enough to claim it. What have we built? What have we become ? Dig beneath Raccoon City. What shadows did Umbrella cultivate in labs beyond Arklay? The progenitor's instability wasn't a flow, it was the blueprint. Before 1998, their reach stretched across continents, stitching contagion into soil and skyline. Spencer Mansion, not a vault, but a proving ground. The T-virus wasn't a lake, it was a signal. A city's collapse, the final phase of a protocol written in blood. How many more experiments lie dormant, waiting for the world to be ready, or the hand to unearth them? Beneath the ash of Raccoon's pyre, a vault still breathes. The progenitor's shadow feeds a newer strain, the G-virus, a thorn in the flesh of progress. What grows when a corporation's first sin becomes its script?